You rely on this podcast to stay informed and connected with your local community, and we rely on you. Without listener support, this show simply wouldn't exist. Be a part of the team that makes this show possible by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute. Donate at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thank you.
You're listening to Sound Side. I'm Libby Denkmann. When Fitz Cahall started his Dirtbag Diaries podcast in 2007, he was an avid outdoorsman struggling to make ends meet as a travel writer. At the time, this whole on-demand audio storytelling kind of thing was new, and Fitz saw it as a way of bringing new life to his joy of the outdoors. Today, he's replaced his wild life bouncing around in a van with the concrete landscape of Seattle, where he continues to host his podcast with his wife, Becca, and their team of producers. And 17 years after they first began, Fitz and his crew have now adapted 30 of their favorite Dirtbag Diaries into a new book. It's called States of Adventure, Stories About Finding Yourself by Getting Lost. And Fitz Cahall is here with me to talk about it. Hey, Fitz, it's great to meet you. Glad to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
And I know you were, just down the street here in the U District, so it was a tough walk over to make it here to the studio.
No, it's funny. I mean, I'm a UW graduate too, so I always sort of joke I did not make it very far, like a block from campus.
I say the same thing. I know. I work right next to where I graduated from college. Yeah. Never knew I would end up here, but happy to be here. So I just kind of wanted to start off with what I assume is a pretty common question for you. Mm-hmm. What's the definition of dirtbag?
Well, it started out as basically this term that climbers living in Camp 4 in Yosemite back in the day, sort of the golden age of climbing in the 60s and 70s, applied to themselves. Like, basically, it was this idea you were sleeping in the dirt, you were pouring all of your resources, and they might be pretty minimal, into your passion. And in that case, it was for climbing. And then through the years, that term has become sort of more synonymous with someone who's super passionate about the outdoors. And at this stage in life, I'm like, if you want to use that and you love being outside, I think it's yours. So yeah, it started in this very fringe, very sort of hardcore community, but it's expanded to sort of cover anyone who's passionate about being outside.
So how did this podcast thing come about? Because you were podcasting before I knew what the heck a podcast was. You started in 2007. How did you get going?
Yeah, well, scrappily, because I had a lot of admiration for some of the long-form storytelling that was happening in radio. I loved it. I was also super interested in the internet. So I'd been working in online writing, blogs, that sort of space beforehand, and sort of at the moment where I was like, oh, this is cool, I could do that. And I had been working in print media. At that moment, print media was sort of like totally collapsing, it felt like, at that stage. And
that was like the Craigslist apocalypse going on?
Yeah, that version, that collapse.
We've had many.
We've had many, it's true. And so I had these great stories that I had heard and people had told me about through the years, and I couldn't sell those stories to some of the magazines. I could sell stories about, more famous outdoor athletes or adventurers or climbers, but I saw these stories as really cool. They were just so emblematic of what was happening in the outdoor community, of people kind of living their lives a little bit against the grain. And I took them and I was like, hey, I'll just take these stories and turn them into a podcast. And if nobody listens, that's totally fine. Hey, it's cool. But they're going to get out there. And for me, it was one of those things where, I did the first one and then the second one to make sure that I was like actually able to, could practice finishing something. And at that second one, I sort of sent out an email to 30 friends and was like, hey, I've done this thing and I think it's pretty cool. I hope you enjoy. And, especially in those days with podcasting, you'd sort of like, look, did anyone download this? And it was this moment where I saw that all 30 friends had downloaded this. And then the next day it was 300. And then the next day it was 3,000. Wow. And I realized in that moment that my life had changed or my career had changed, and that I really, really didn't see a path forward up until that point. And from then on, I was like, no, this is working. Other people think these stories are cool. And even though the editors didn't want them, I had the sense that the larger outdoor space, especially online, that these stories were going to mean something to people. They were going to provide a form of connection, both to me, to the community, but then the community to the rest of the community that's spread out all across the country, all across the world. So it was, it felt like pretty much like a lightning bolt moment for me back in 2007.
Shows take a while to kind of coalesce. Do you remember the first episode where you thought, okay, this is what I want the show to be? Like an early episode that stands out to you?
One of the first that really stood out was I had a friend named Corey Rich, who was a really sort of successful, hardworking outdoor photographer. And you saw his photos everywhere, but no one had ever really bothered to even sort of share his experience of how he had gone about that. And, you know, it was like such a simple low-hanging fruit. We called it 1,000 words, you know, it was just like easy thing. And it sort of took these images that he had done and he told stories behind them. And it was super impactful. And that one spread, like, because everyone's interested, like, how does someone make a photo on El Capitan? Like, how does that happen? And it was this little window that opened into the world. And for me, that was kind of what I was going after. In that same year, I remember that was at the sort of height of the Iraq War at that moment in time. And it was one of the most difficult periods of time. And I, heard that there were a couple of guys that worked in the medevac units and the helicopter units that had made a climbing wall in one of the hangars there.
Wow.
And this was, Skype was around. You could maybe get voice over internet, barely, but it wasn't going to I couldn't interview these people via Skype in Iraq. And I remember putting a recorder in a box and shipping it to their base with this list of questions. And they, I remember 2 months later, I get a box back. I was like, wow, that worked. That's amazing.
Oh my gosh.
And inside of it, they start, they're asking the questions that are prepared from back and forth. And there's a moment where you just hear the paper slide across the desk. And they just start talking about what this climbing wall has meant. They had to go under the black market to find the right bolts to put it into the wall. And that for them, it was this connection back home. And it was a connection back to humanity and back to the sport and being outside, even when they just could not have that at that moment in their life. And they were going through such difficult things. They were seeing friends dying. And that for me was the kind of story that I felt like needed to be told in the outdoor space. And so that was what I was looking for. I was looking for the things that I felt were truly inspired, that I was hearing on a day-to-day basis because I was out in the community doing these things. And I felt like this is what matters. Mm-hmm. It's not, Alex Honnold is great, but it isn't always the Alex Honnolds we need to hear about. It's important to see that our neighbors, that our friends are doing incredible things with their lives in impactful ways. And from that point, seeing that, is I realized there's so many ways because people are just living their lives through the outdoors, right? So that means that there's struggles with mental health. There's joy, there's humor, there's love. There's all these incredibly human emotions. And I felt like up until that point, outdoor reporting was often pretty one-dimensional. And I thought we could kind of make that encompass the bigger range of emotions.
Yeah, it was like adrenaline junkie stuff,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. It was the sort
Not
of
to
Red Bull.
dismiss that,
yeah.
but it felt very, extreme style of the early 2000s.
Yeah, and that wasn't really the case. It was even the people that were the sort of quote unquote poster children of adrenaline junkies. They had a lot deeper things going on inside of their worlds, and so that was what I hoped the podcast could become, and I think it has.
So let's talk about the book.
Yeah.
There's a line in your second story called Winnebago Warriors that stood out to us. You're writing about a girl named Abby Holcomb's ambition to kayak the full descent of the Grand Canyon. And she's only 12 when she's having this ambition. You write, quote, "Moments like these present an opportunity to walk right up to our fears, pick them apart, and then try to reassemble them into purpose." So I want to ask you, are there moments in your relationship with the outdoors where you've done this kind of deconstruction of your fears, and what came of that?
Yeah, right. So often, the stories of adventures are sort of presented as sort of superhuman, right? And so I think sometimes when we engage with that right out of the gate, we say to ourselves, is this for me? And that's can be a really important question to ask. Sometimes you do need a certain amount of training to go and climb Mount Rainier per se. But I think there's a level of it that it's really important to understand that anyone who's done this in the past, for the most part, they have not had a coach that said you made the team. That was self-selection. And so I think that reality of asking, like, do I want to do something? And then what does it take? And will it be scary? Is such an important part of it. And I think most of the time when most people recreate out in the outdoors, hopefully it's not scary. It shouldn't be. Like 99% of the time you can make it just be fun. Like we talk about the 3 types of fun inside of the outdoor community. Type 1 is just like that pure, like I got a smile on my face. I'm skiing up at the Snoqualmie Summit, having a good time. And type 2 is a little bit more difficult. Like maybe it starts in the, before the sun rises and finishes after the sun sets. And, you're going to be pretty worked. And type 3 are the things that are potentially scary. And I think that there certainly have been moments in my life where I've looked at even places here inside Washington State, because I am a really big believer that for that type of really incredible adventure, we live in one of the best places for it. And so I think for me, I would see things. I would see, like, say, the skyline of a range, and I would think, could I do that in a day? Or could I climb those 3 peaks in a single day? And when I was young, it would sort of keep me up at night because I had this thought, and I'd be like, and I was certainly competent at that stage. Like I had the skills, but it was that curiosity of like, well, what's in between? What's that going to feel like? What's that going to be like? And that would be overwhelming. And I think that that's maybe the term we think of as fear, right? And for me, I think that's one of the most important teachers that we have out there, is that because that happens in life, right? We have an idea of what we could do in our career. We have an idea of what we could do in our lives or in our relationships. And we look at it and we think, that's probably a good idea. But it's sort of like, that actual moment of that happening is so unclear. And it's so hard to imagine what it's going to feel like that it stops us. And so I think the outdoors can be a great teacher in that sense when you find a challenge. And maybe that means just like running a trail race. Maybe it means taking like an all-day hike. It can mean so many different things. But to look at that and say, hey, I actually don't know what that's going to look like. I've worked hard to get there, but I don't totally know how it's going to feel. That's a sign that, as long as you've done the preparation, you're ready to go try that. Because that's when you learn that feeling, and then you can carry that into so many parts of your life.
What is it that makes you look at a mountain range and say, I want to climb 3 of those peaks in one day? Because I am a person, when you describe those 3 types of fun, I'm firmly in the first type. I love a day hike.
I do too.
I love going out, and having maybe 8 hours of fun and then going back to my mattress and indoor plumbing. I've had a handful of experiences that I am so grateful for in the maybe type 2. I've never been a person who wants to actually like risk anything in type 3.
Yeah.
What is it that drives you or that gets under your skin that makes you a person and makes an outdoors person, move between type of fun 1 to type of fun 2 to 3? Like what's inside your head?
Well, part of it is I think you have to sort of build up to that a little bit, where you have to, in the beginning, it all just sort of seems kind of difficult or mysterious, right? And then it becomes less so. And it's not a matter of just like, I want more, but you begin to see, I think, some of the elegance inside of nature, which it's everywhere, obviously. And you can find that just by sitting calmly in a meadow for sure. But maybe for some people, they also can see it of being like, wow, I could really move across this landscape. And there is a wonder in that. And that sort of human-powered quiet moments of moving through our backyard, our big mountain range, our waters, all that. I mean, the Pacific Northwest is so rich with the ability to move through natural ecosystems. And it's amazing. And so I think that it comes from seeing that kind of beauty and then being curious about that beauty. What would that look like? What would that feel like? Is that possible even? Is it possible for me? I think that's what happens to people's minds. And we see that happens all the time, right? That happens in art. It happens in business. It happens in the rest of our spaces. So why wouldn't it happen out there? Is that there are people that are going to look at something and they're going to say, I see something maybe a little bit bigger, or something that's not everyone else can see right now. But once I sort of throw that out there, other people are going to say, hey, that is cool. That is beautiful. And so I think that that comes from a very human space of looking at terrain, whatever type of terrain that is, and thinking, could it be connected? Could it become something more than what it was?
What do you think about the ways in which outdoor adventuring has changed with more media attention, greater cultural awareness? Like, we have glamping, we have van life trends on social media. We've talked about on this show how soaring prices and crowded ski slopes are sort of threatening the ski bum culture, not to mention climate change.
Yeah.
I was in Sedona recently, and some of those really Instagrammable hikes were very, very crowded. And yet when you go and talk to the visitor center folks who are locals, they first ask, are you an influencer? And when you say no, I swear I'm not, they'll clue you in on hikes that haven't made, the big kind of social media sites or social media trends. And you have these amazing open spaces and less crowded trails. But what do you make about the way that outdoor activity has changed with media attention?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because I do think you are totally correct, is that there has been situations where, like, the attention that gets paid for it, or sort of the recreation that can happen with Instagram.
Like, you have to get that one shot at that one rock because it's cool and everybody else is doing it.
And that has been, quite frankly, for the people that have to like look after and care for our landscapes, it's been a total pain in the butt. And that's been a really sad thing about that. That said, there was a day when someone might open, say, a National Geographic or some sort of travel book, or see some photo and think, man, I would like to go there. That looks incredible, or that culture looks interesting to me, right? We get that all the time. And in so many ways, the sort of rise of the internet has turned everything up to 11, or the speed of it. And that's part of what's happened. And there's a side of it, it's like where it's really easy to pick on that influencer, but there's also a lot more people doing this, and a lot more people,
which is a great thing.
Yeah. Because I think that, science has repeatedly, scientists, people smarter than me, have repeatedly said that being outside is good for you. It's good for your health. It's good for your mental health, like all those things. So on a level, it's like easy to sort of pinpoint some of the Instagram influencers gone wild and be like, oh, that's not ideal. But I think that in general, having more people in the outdoors has been a good thing for our society. I think that is something that is a benefit. And I think it's come at a time where, maybe we all could be spending less time on our phones too. It's kind of the same time as that technology has integrated into our lives at a faster rate than ever before. So it's not the worst, in my mind, that the outdoors have started to become bigger and more important inside of our society. And I think it's, there's obviously the Instagram influencer sort of detraction, but over the last 15 years, I've seen our community become more responsible and savvier and able to participate in, environmental decisions on a federal and a state level, show up, become politically active and helpful, and become stewards of a space that, we use and we love. And that's the positive side of the rise of the outdoors too, is that because more people have an attachment to it, it means that we become savvier about participating in our society.
Yeah, and being stewards.
Yep.
I'm talking with Fitz Cahall, the host of the Dirtbag Diaries podcast and author of the new book, States of Adventure. And Fitz, one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book are these postscripts. So after you share the story, you have at the end a little update on where the subjects are today, including some of the stories from your own life. Were there any surprises in some of the ways that people you followed, their lives ended up, or they've, developed their career, and anything that stands out to you about the sort of where are they now moments?
Yeah. For the most part, I would say that it was remarkable how people kind of continue. This didn't end up being a phase in somebody's life. I kind of thought maybe that would happen as we went back and kind of caught up with people, is that it was pretty incredible. There's a great story in there called Mr. Hodges about this sort of middle school, high school teacher who in the 70s and 80s, way back in the day, would sort of organize a bicycle club, and they would take these incredible, I mean, thousands of mile journeys with students over the summer. And Mr. Hodges is long since retired, but he was still figuring out, even in his 80s, like how to still participate and get kids outside. And that was the incredible part about this, is that this didn't seem fleeting for a lot of the people we told stories about, is that, yes, maybe their relationship evolved. For the people that were trying really difficult things, maybe they're a lot happier sitting on the edge of a meadow or by a river versus like trying to get to the, find the most badass way up a peak or something like that. Is that it shifted, but the truth is that these experiences had a lasting and profound impact on the course of their lives. And, for some people, it meant they got married to one of their partner they'd done these adventures with. For some people, it meant they raised their kids outdoors. And so for some people, it meant that they made their passion, their actual life works through conservation or creativity. And so I think that was the startling part about it, is it wasn't glancing. And some of these connections, they really ended up defining people's lives and really defining what people define as success, right? And that to me is like one of the biggest takeaways, I think, from the book, the podcast, is there are results, right, in this world. And results we don't always have control of. We don't, we may not win the soccer game, right? We may not get the promotion at work. We do have control of how we define success in this world. And that to me is a really important thing, is sometimes we get hung up on these results, which we don't have control over, but success, we get to define it. And I think what I saw in these stories is people, they figured out how to live and how to define that success on their own terms, and they lived towards that sort of setting of a North Star and heading there. That's pretty cool to see in these people's lives.
As somebody who has traveled all over, enjoyed outdoors in some of the United States' most beautiful places, you live here in Seattle. What makes the Northwest special? What makes it stand out to you? And for somebody who, wants to dip their toe into this outdoors world and feels maybe a little intimidated, what would you recommend they do? Oh,
yeah. Well, first off, I mean, I am biased because I live here and I've made that choice a long time ago, but we live in one of, like right now, it's late summer and this is the best weather on the planet. Like undeniably so right now. It is 75 and perfect. There's been some moisture. It's like the forest is alive, the whole thing. I mean, it's just amazing weather and there's so many things you can do. So sometimes it's almost hard to choose. There is an embarrassment of riches here for what you could do outdoors. And so I think I would just start, it's like, what's piqued your curiosity? Is it taking a hike up in one of the valleys? I mean, one of the things I love, being stuck on traffic. I don't love being in traffic on I-5, but when you're there, sometimes the light's shining and you can actually see some of the valleys out in the Olympics. And I'll think to myself, like, what's up there? And that's a good way. So if there's ever been like something you've looked at or, a trailhead you've passed by where you see a bunch of cars parked, try that. Start there. And that's a great, great spot to go. I also think for me, this summer's been really busy at work. I've had to be in the office more. It's just the life stuff's been in there. And sometimes I just go grab 20 minutes. There's a little bit of woods near a stream by my house that's, 5 blocks away. I walk down there, take the kids some days, and I just get 25 minutes out in the woods. And that feels great to me. And I don't know, I love it. I also think you could open up an atlas of Washington and just pick a part you've never been to.
Yeah.
And chances are, too, it's like, we've talked about sort of like overcrowding for camping or whatever. And if you look at some of the other places, you're like, what's down there? And you haven't heard of it. Chances are it's incredible. But there's also free, there's not a lot of people doing the same thing.
You can actually get camping spots.
Yeah, there's a camping spot, So I think it's worth just kind of allowing your own curiosity to drive a little bit. And some people, that's going to look really different. That might mean signing up for a course to learn how to climb Mount Rainier, because I think that's certainly something a lot of people see every day. They're like, what would it be like to stand on top of that? And that might be what it looks like. But it might also be like going and renting a paddleboard out on Puget Sound and just taking a 20-minute stand-up paddleboard. That'd be incredible. Like, so we have so many choices, and I would just let your own curiosity drive it, because I do think that that's an important thing of letting that come from internal versus like, oh, hearing you should do this or whatever. Because I'm not a big believer. The motivation for doing stuff outdoors, especially things that might, feel challenging, should come from inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I highly recommend the podcast. It's called Dirtbag Diaries. Fitz Cahall is the host, and he's got a new book, States of Adventure, with a number of the wonderful stories from over the years of Dirtbag Diaries and amazing photography. I really appreciate you joining me, Fitz. This has been great, and it's just fun to connect with you. You've been a podcasting OG, and you guys are still just sounding so good and bringing fresh stories and amazing characters to the podcast airwaves. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Libby, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.
Hi there, I'm Monica Guzman, host of A Braver Way podcast and your guide across the political divide. Are you done with the divisiveness in our politics and ready to do something about it? This season, we've partnered with KUOW to reach more listeners like you. Join me as I sit down with guests from across the political spectrum. Together, we'll share tools, insights, and messy, real-life stories to help you face this election year without losing heart. Listen to A Braver Way now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.